Welcome back, everybody. Today we're doing the long-awaited top 10 running backs for the 2026 rookie class. I will be placing them, all of them, specifically in the order that I think they should be ranked in as prospects, combining both, of course, analytics and some film analysis from the source that I use that for. A little different from the wide receiver model, though. My running back model heavily or more heavily relies on analytics and not quite so much on film. Before we get into this thing, though, I want to quickly touch on some of the metrics I use for my model. It is going to be very similar to how I explained the wide receiver model. I want to give people some insight on how I got these numbers to begin with. So with that being said, let's quickly run through that and then jump right into the top 10. Very similar to my wide receiver model, I have taken a ton of inspiration from JJ Zacharyson and the metrics that he uses for his models, with a couple of different tweaks thrown in on my end. I really believe he is the absolute best at evaluating prospects through an analytical lens and throwing in context when it's needed. His process, it's so clean. And in order to do the same, I felt like taking some pointers from him would make a ton of sense for my process and try to make it the best, possible way to evaluate prospects. So the first and most important metric in my model is, of course, like most people's, draft capital. This is weighted at a whopping 40%, and it's easily the most important variable. Obviously, the higher a draft pick that a team spends on a player, the more opportunity that they will get right away. Sometimes it's not always the case, but most of the time it is, so that's why it's so heavily weighted. This is especially important for running backs because there's usually only one of them on the field at the same time, and we need that capital to reassure us that the opportunity and talent are all there. The next two metrics that I use is a production score, which is almost identical to what I use in my wide receiver model, and a reception score. Both of these are each weighted at 20%. Production score takes the player's prorated yards per team pass attempt over his best season and is multiplied by the team's strength of schedule that year, along with another multiplier based on the player's age that they were that current season. This helps balance out the strength of opponent and signals how good a prospect was early on or late into their career. Reception score is taking the percentage of receptions that the running back accounted for based on the number of completions that the team had in that season, based on the amount of games that the player played in as well. So that's a piece of good important context. So say a running back caught 37 passes in a season, and the team completed 208 passes when he played or in the games that he did play. His reception share would be 17.8%. You might ask why I have so many actually receiving metric in my model for running backs. Well, to be honest, that's basically what makes a fantasy running back so valuable. It's the most important metric of a fantasy running back these days, and the one that helps create or that gives the largest ceiling to a player and how good a receiver, can be on a per down basis. In fact, I really only use receiving metrics in my model. I don't use any rushing metrics. Once again, I completely credit JJ Zacharyson for this and my inspiration and realization of this, overall. It is the most important factor when projecting how good a running back prospect will be good in fantasy. I know a lot of them are much better in real life because they're early down rushers, but in terms of fantasy, we want to see that receiving type of production. So that is why I use these two metrics and why they are so heavily weighted in my model. The last two metrics I use is a film score and an age score. The film score is once again based off Lance Zierlein's scores that he has for all these prospects and is weighted at just 15%. So not as high as the wide receivers because I'm kind of throwing my type of film analysis in there. Zierlein has been really, really good, has a really good track record at predicting running backs based on their film throughout the years. So it felt like a good metric to incorporate, and I would just want to trust people who know more about the position before I learn more myself and start giving out grades to players. I feel like I'm much, much better at evaluating wide receivers at this point, and before I use my own running back scores, I want to make sure that I understand the position, and that'll probably start next season. To quickly touch on age score, it is weighted at just 5%. The score is calculated based on how young or old the prospect is, of course. We want to reward the prospects who are young and kind of ding a little bit the ones who are a little bit older. Usually there is a reason a player is older or younger when declaring for the NFL draft, and this variable takes that into account just a little bit. The last thing that is baked into the running back model is a bonus based on a player's weight-adjusted speed score. This is the only thing that, kind of account for any sort of athleticism. Once again, I don't have any athleticism or rushing metrics in my model. It gives a +2 for weight-adjusted speed scores between 110 and 115, a +4 for between 115 and 120, and a +6 for anything above 120, so like the elite of elite athletes. So there is an athleticism metric that gets thrown in there as a bonus. I also have a -2 built in for anybody that has a score between 92 and 85, and a -4 for anything below 85. Kind of dings the guys who are much less athletic and who are really, really not athletic. It just balances it out there a little bit. This helps elevate prospects who test incredibly well at the combine and dock those who are, of course, limited in that area. I realize people like athleticism for running backs. I just don't incorporate it into my model for anything more than a bonus. It's mildly important in my opinion, but doesn't predict how good of a fantasy asset or a prospect, will be at the next level compared to what maybe receiving metrics might be used for and how predictive they are. I realize that is a ton of information to take in. Hopefully it wasn't too nerdy, and the graphic I used better helped you understand the metrics and variables and kind of made it easier to understand. Enough of this numbers talk though. Let's dive into this group of running backs and break down their profiles one by one. I have everything you would possibly need to know about most of these guys, their strengths, their weaknesses, red flags, and what their prospect grade tells us about their projection to the NFL, and most importantly, for our dynasty teams and in fantasy football. At number one, a surprise to literally nobody, Jeremiah Love, running back out of Notre Dame, going to be the consensus 101 in our rookie drafts and will likely be selected inside the top 10 of the NFL draft. He has been talked about as one of the best running back prospects that we have ever seen. If you just watch him play on your TV at home, it might be hard to disagree with that. However, he isn't quite there for me in my model. He ranks closest, though, to like Bijan, Jonathan Taylor, and Leonard Fournette, and is the 8th best prospect of all time. So just a tier below the legendary top 5 guys, just at the very top. A little more context, the group of 5 I am referring to in order is Christian McCaffrey, Saquon, Ashton Genty, Jahmyr Gibbs, and Todd Gurley. Those are the 5 players that have a 90 plus prospect grade in my model, and that I think are just a touch above the rest. Regardless of this, Jeremiah Love is still a phenomenal prospect. He showed that he can be a high volume running back as not just a rusher, but as a receiver as well, the thing we all love the most. He's got the frame for it, and he showed at the combine that he is more than athletic enough to, just handle that workload overall. He checked in at 6 foot 212. His athleticism was just a cherry on top. We knew he was athletic, but we got to see him run, which sometimes a lot of these guys like Ashton Genty last year did not run, so we don't get to see like how athletic they are. He ran a 4.3640. He had a 117.3 speed score. Although he might not have the counting numbers as a receiver that some of the top prospects have in the past, he was incredibly efficient throughout his career in that area. He got 55 passes over the past 2 seasons and amassed over 500 yards or receiving yards with those catches. He finished with a career 1.6 yards per route run, which is fantastic. Love to see it. Love is also great after contact. 4.39 and 4.5 yards out of contact per attempt in the past 2 seasons. Makes people miss in the open field, which shows with a 31% missed tackles force per attempt over his time at Notre Dame. He also won't be 21 years old until after the NFL draft. I mean, seriously, there is nothing not to like about Jeremiah Love. He checks just about every single box you want, and it's about as close to a guarantee to produce a 20-plus point per game season as literally anybody. The only question is, where does he end up, and how long does it take for him to hit that ceiling? Landing spot is going to probably determine it. Well, to take a look at mock draft database, he is projected to go 4th overall, and that kind of makes sense. Just about every mock draft I see him he's inside the top 10 most of the time, landing with either the Titans at 4 or the Commanders at 7. I have seen mocks where he goes at 2 to the Jets or 3 to the Cardinals. Although I think this is very unlikely to happen, it kind of gives you a good idea just how much the NFL values Jeremiah Love. But let's circle back to the 2 main landing spots I have seen and kind of just talk about it a little bit. The Titans at 4. This is the landing spot I think out of the 2 that I would like the least. Obviously, the Titans' offensive line or this offense infrastructure just kind of worries me overall. While I like Cam Ward and the coaching hires that they made with Robert Saleh as the head coach and Brian Daboll as the offensive coordinator, I just don't think they're ready to bring in Jeremiah Love as much as some of the other destinations. Their offensive line is not the greatest, and I imagine there will be a ton of stacked boxes. He will face a ton of stacked boxes. There won't be a ton of room for him to run. They're not with basically the best of the Titans' weapons right now is Wan'Dale Robinson. So yeah, not exactly the shiniest of destinations. I'm sorry, Titans fans. The Washington Commanders, though, oh mama. I mean, I would love this for all parties. It feels like at this point, it's the one that's mocked the most, and it feels like it's unlikely to happen. But the Commanders would finally get someone to solidify that spot with, next to Jaden Daniels at quarterback. This would be so much fun, just how much of a rushing threat Daniels is in general. Add in Love and the explosive home run ability that he has, and you're cooking with gas. That offense is going to look amazing. I just like the overall offense a lot more. Jaden Daniels is a lot more proven than Cam Ward. It's also worth mentioning that there has been buzz. I want to point this out. There has been buzz about the Giants possibly taking him 5th overall. This would make no sense to me. It makes sense to some other people, I guess, but they have Cam Scatterby, who they drafted last year, was a hit. I know he got injured, but Tyron Tracy the year before that was also a hit, and they seem to complement each other quite well. It just seems like a misuse of assets to me. That's just my opinion, though. I know a lot of people might disagree. Jeremiah Love is like a different type of running back that he's like a tier above all these guys that I just mentioned. To float out a few more options if he somehow like falls past the Commanders at 7, I think the Bengals would have a hard time not taking him 10th overall. Chase Brown's contract is up after this year, and it seems like Jeremiah Love would just be a shoe-in to just Joe Burrow, T. Higgins, Jamar Chase. It'd be the best offense in the NFL. Clearly, in terms of personnel, the Cowboys at 12. I hardly think he makes it out of the top 10, though, so that's why I'm kind of like more hesitant. I don't think the Cowboys would pass on him. Maybe they would. I wouldn't put it past Jerry Jones, but there was also the talk about the Cowboys taking Ashton Jeanty last year. Of course, he didn't fall, but I think it's more likely that one of these teams or someone else trades up to select him rather than him falling that far. So to kind of sum things up, I think Jeremiah Love, of course, he's phenomenal. He's awesome. He's great. He does literally everything super well and grades out as a top 8 prospect in my model. When he is taken in the NFL draft, he likely becomes like the RB3 or RB4 in fantasy, just behind or in front of Ashton Jeanty. Again, I think the landing spot will heavily determine which direction that he goes. Regardless of, he's the easy one-on-one in 2026 rookie drafts, and he will be valued as a running back asset that will be, he'll eventually have a legendary 20-plus running back or 20-plus point per game season in the NFL. Just pretty much a guarantee. I think 7 of the 8 guys are, I think other than Leonard Fournette, he is the only guy that didn't average 20 points per game, but he had like 18, 19 points per game seasons in there. It's just pretty much almost a given. The only burning question, though, like I just mentioned, is how long does it take for him to get there? And does the destination allow him to reach that ceiling more than once in his career? Okay, so usually I refer to my model when it comes to ranking guys who are so close together. And rarely do I push up the 6th best prospect in my model to be my number 2 running back in a class. But here we are, and let me give my reasoning for having Jadarian Price at number 2 and in a tier by himself, because I can understand the people who might ask, what is the point of having a model if you're going to trust it? And honestly, they have a good point, and they might be correct. I'm basically betraying everything I believe with this decision. Price is not only outside of my top 5 in terms of prospect grade, but he's also a sub 15 production score with his fifth worst in the class, and a sub 10 reception score that comes in dead last in the entire class. The model clearly doesn't like Jadarian Price, and understandably so. This class is also incredibly weak, I want to say. I know I don't want to hate on the class any more than people already have, but I just want to point that out. Just in terms of the context of Jadarian Price and how low he scores in the model. The most important factor in all this, though, is the projected draft capital that Jadarian Price is expected to get. This is, of course, the highest weighted variable in my model and one that is hard to argue with. Another thing that my model doesn't take into account is the fact that he also played behind one of the best prospects ever, 8th prospect all time, the guy that we just talked about, Jeremiah Love, the guy we spent a ton of time just talking about how great he is. He played behind him, and let's contextualize that for a second, because I want to make a case for Jadarian Price, just even though it's a little harder to do on the surface. I know we have seen a couple of similar examples in the past. Take the Alabama running back room a few years back that saw 2 running backs taken in the first 3 rounds, Josh Jacobs and Damian Harris. It also had Najee Harris on that same team. That Alabama team was absolutely ridiculous. It doesn't make any sense how all those guys were on the same team. They all vultured touches from each other and held each other back from having a true ceiling. Still, though, Jacobs went in the first round and Damian Harris went in the 3rd. A more recent example was Javonte Williams and Michael Carter coming out of North Carolina in the 2021 NFL Draft. Javonte was selected at the 35th pick, and Carter went with the 104th pick, so a little bit after him, but both in the same backfield at the same time in college. Do you want to know who Jadarian Price closest comps in the model are? Because it's Damian Harris and Michael Carter. They are literally back to back to back. And this is, of course, my biggest argument for Jadarian Price being this high, because despite him not grading out well, it is very, very rare that you see a running back projected to go this high with as bad of a profile as his at the same time, and he was the 2nd best running back in his own team. It's very, very rare, and while this is a reason to be in on Price, I think you can, like I said, just make just as good of an argument against him, and that's what scares me the most about him and Price's, profile in general. He's someone that I have a hard time figuring out. I really do. Even now, I still don't know how I feel. Like, for instance, I'm not even someone who cares all that much that he ran a slower 40 time at the combine than most were anticipating. I thought he was going to run a lot faster, but he came out and ran a 4.49, which comes out to a speed score of less than 100, just barely, though. Not ideal, though, for someone who weighed in at barely just over 200 pounds. And while I think his performing was a little disappointing, it is something that I would put at probably the bottom of my list in terms of concerns. I already know from the tape that he looks pretty explosive. He had almost a 10% breakaway rate in his final season, so that part checks out. He also makes guys miss. He forced 30 missed tackles and had a 26.5% missed tackles forced per attempt. Also really good, also top of the class. He was also great after contact, a 3.92 yards after contact per attempt, which is good for third in the class. It looks like he checks it on tape as well, as he had the second best Zerline score in the class by a wide margin. And I've heard a ton of people just rave about his film. It really comes down to his ability as a receiver, though, and if he has that in his game. The guy only caught 15 passes his entire 3 years at Notre Dame. That isn't much to go off of. It's not much to project, and it's not much to think that he's going to automatically just do it in the NFL. At the same time, people also have concerns about his ability as a pass blocker. Once again, another hole to poke in this game that I just don't like to see. In my honest opinion, based off what I know, my best guess that he fits pretty much right into the mold of a Damian Harris, who is one of his comps in the model, like I mentioned. Also, I don't want to ruin anybody's excitement, but Deontay Foreman seems like another comp in his model that seems very reasonable. And I think at an absolute ceiling for him, I know he's not a comp in the model for him, but it's probably James Conner. If he, suddenly figures out that he, figures out his catching ability in the NFL and he's an outlier. While I think there are a ton of holes to poke in Price's profile, I think he is probably the safest in terms of who will likely see the best draft capital and be the second running back taken off the board. He's projected to be a top 50 pick on both mock draft database and in the PFF big board, and it seems like a foregone conclusion that he goes in round 2 at this point. That type of draft capital makes it easier to move him here, just basically looking at kind of where he's also projected to go in rookie drafts as well. The hit rate in the second round is much better. And I think he will hold a lot more value in your league mates' minds because of it. It'd be easier to trade, easier to move. Some of the landing spots that would make a lot of sense and that would maybe make him much easier to move than he already might be, assuming that he gets second round draft capital, would be like the Titans at 35, if assuming they don't take Jeremiah Love, the Vikings at 49, the Panthers at 51, Bears at 57 or 60. We know they wanted to take a running back last year. I don't know how they feel about Monangai and Swift being their long-term option. Maybe they want to add a little more juice in there. Or even the Seahawks at pick 32, I saw that floated out there, or 64. Any of these spots would be great, and I could see the hype getting pretty out of hand. This likely means that he's probably going to end up in the mid to late first of rookie drafts. People are going to vault him up, being the running back 2 off the board. Top 50, top 60, round 2 draft capital. Then at that point you could either decide to capitalize on that spike or trust on him becoming an outlier, because the odds are stacked against him based on the model, based on what we've seen historically. I can see an argument though for both sides, and that's why I have him number 2 in my rankings. A really tough evaluation, and one that is going to be really interesting to see how it all folds on draft night and after the conclusion of the NFL draft. For my first prospect in tier 3 is a player that I would really love to have put in the same tier as Jadarian Price, but ultimately struggled to in the end, and that is Jonah Coleman, my RB3 and the running back out of Washington. Unfortunately, I am not as confident the NFL views him as high as me, and also I do kind of share the imagination of those that believe that Jadarian Price can be an outlier, so that's why I wanted to put him in a tier by himself. Coleman is easily, though, my favorite running back in the class outside of Jeremiah Love. He is awesome. He's a bowling ball of a player. He checked in at 5'8", 220 pounds. He breaks tackles, can make you miss for a bit for his size, and just throws dudes off of him. It is like very reminiscent of Cam Scatabo and fits that archetype almost to a T. The best thing about Jonah Coleman is the threat that he is as a receiver out of the backfield. Not what you would expect from someone at his size, because over the past 3 seasons, he's caught 79 passes for over 800 yards and finished with a 1.22 yards per route run in his 4 years in college. Coleman finished overall with a 57.1 prospect grade, which ranked 5th in the class. Really good. Really close to these next 4 guys who are all in the same tier, but all the guys ranked ahead of them just barely edged him out. He's pretty solid in all of the variables in the model as well, and ranks top 5 or 6 in just about every single category. His closest comps statistically are Ramondre Stevenson, Kenyon Drake, Zach Moss, and I think this is the most optimistic of the model comp that you will see, and gives me confidence that there is upside with him if he is taken on day 2 or even early day 3, like early 4th round, like where Cam Scatabo, Bashal Tootin, and Woody Marks went last year. That might be the biggest hurdle for him, though, just getting day 2 draft capital. Although he is technically projected to be taken on day 2 at the moment, just making it inside the top 100 on both mock draft database and the PFF big board, I am not so confident that that actually comes true. The reason for this is the worry about his overall athleticism, and I'm not saying it's not a concern, but it is especially for the NFL. They definitely take it into account, and He decided, of course, not to participate in any testing at the combine or his pro day, which led people to question his speed and how slow he might be even more than they already were. It's a valid question, and trust me, I understand you wanting or people wanting running backs, GMs, front offices, coaches wanting running backs who they're taking in the first 3 to 4 rounds who have that home run hitting ability or have that 4.4 or 4.3 speed. And I think that's why that maybe the Giants, we've heard whispers of them taking Jeremiah Love, Cam Scatterbu. It's not as flashy. It's not as it looks really really cool when they house a 70-yard touchdown and they outrun the entire defense. So I get wanting to add Love to a Cam Scatterbu backfield and just adding that extra element. However, I feel like recently we have seen so many running backs break this mold and become really, really productive NFL players. Obviously, I know I just mentioned Cam Scatterbu, who falls into that same category. He was awesome last year before he had that season-ending injury, but my mind also goes to Bucky Irving, which I know just a couple of years ago really broke out as a rookie. Kyron Williams a couple of years before that. I can even think of David Montgomery, who ran in the 4.6s, and just has been a phenomenal running back in the NFL since the day he stepped into the league. Even Ramondre Stevenson, who Coleman ranks closely to in the model, has been really solid and still is. All these guys either didn't test well, didn't run fast, or lacked the elite athleticism the NFL teams really pretty much drool over every single year, which is why they vault certain guys up. They also overlook though the important things that impact these or that running backs impact on a down to down basis as receivers, as pass blockers around the goal line, and even just players with good vision, which I believe that Jonah Coleman has. And I know I'm getting on a soapbox about Jonah Coleman, but I just want people to understand that athleticism doesn't mean good NFL player, and it definitely doesn't make a good fantasy asset. We just have seen so many examples of it. If Coleman is able to secure round 2 or round 3, or even, like I mentioned, early round 4 draft capital and goes to a landing spot where he has a runway to take over that backfield, I am going to be taking him a lot in my rookie drafts, and I really suggest that you do too. I can think of a couple of interesting landing spots that would make a ton of sense. Obviously, the Seahawks are in need of a running back, and Coleman I think, would be a good fit as someone who can just do a little bit of everything. I know Zach Charbonnet is currently there. They're kind of in a similar archetype. But Zach Charbonnet is coming up a torn ACL. He likely misses maybe like half the season, and he's on the last year of his rookie contract. So maybe they look to restart the clock. I know they just let Kenneth Walker walk. So you never know. Like, I think they could bring him in. I think that Coleman could easily take over that backfield. He's very, very talented, has the skill set to do it. Also, why not the Commanders or the Bengals in the early 3rd round? It's not a seamless fit, but if Washington misses on Jeremiah Love, someone takes him ahead. If they pass on him, he would have a runway to the starting job for sure. The Bengals obviously have Chase Brown, I know. However, he is on the last year of his rookie deal, and I'm not sure they want to tie themselves to another expensive offensive skill position player long term. And I know they probably may do the same thing. They may opt to do the same thing with Jonah Coleman. They may want to let someone else pay Chase Brown and bring in a guy like Coleman who has a similar skill set. The Steelers, Vikings, and Panthers all seem like decent landing spots as well, where he could also, have a runway to win the starting job. Their running back class is a bit of a rough one. I'm not going to lie. I know I'm going to probably say that a couple of times throughout this video. I do think, however, there are some hidden gems, and we could see some guys their value spike, and they find themselves in the right landing spot and are given an opportunity early. I think that they could really make a name for themselves. Because really, honestly, at the end of the day, that's the name of the game, right? At this point, I want to be taking shots at players that I think have the skill set, are talented enough to be viable players in fantasy football, and especially in Dynasty. We want to see guys take them the late second, in the early 3rd round, or mid-second round, and see their value spike all the way to the 1st round. We can either decide to cash out there or keep it based on how much we believe in the talent. I think Jonah Coleman fits that mold perfectly. I think the range of outcomes could also see him going anywhere from like the late 1st round of rookie drafts to the late 2nd, just depending on draft capital. That's like a wide gap. I totally get it, but he has flaws. I understand, and maybe I'm a little too high on him. I've seen a lot of other people be, it's a very wide scale on him. People really low on him. Some people are really high on him. The NFL will confirm that for me once the draft concludes, though. It would be silly to say that there isn't upside. Honestly, I think that anybody looking at this profile, can't say that he doesn't have upside. His receiving profile, comps in the model, and underlying metrics confirm this completely. A talented running back that, given the opportunity, could take advantage of it the same way that we saw Cam Scatterbu, Kyron Williams, and Bucky Irving do on their respective teams. So staying in tier 3, we got Mike Washington Jr., the running back out of Arkansas, and my 4th ranked back in this class. He has been the rocket ship at the position this offseason, and after annihilating the combine last month, it's understandably so. So let's start with that because, dude, he was Really, really impressive. And regardless of how much you take that into your account of your evaluation of a running back prospect, I think that it's just absolutely worth mentioning. I know we touched on his performance in the combine video a couple of weeks back, but if you missed it, this is a very, very good refresher. After weighing in at a massive 6'1", 223 pounds, he ran a 4.33 40-yard dash. He had a 1.51 10-yard split, so not like awesome. He's a little bit of a bigger guy, takes him a second to get rolling, but jumped 39 inches in the vertical and recorded a 10.8 broad. I mean, this is alien type of stuff. His RAS score was absolutely ridiculous. Maybe the best combine performance at the position since Chris Johnson, and he was about 20 pounds less than him and much, much shorter than Mike Washington. He didn't do any of the agility drills at the combine. However, he did do them at his pro day. Turned in a relatively average shuttle at 4.32, but he had a 6.913 cone, which is very, very impressive for his size and that weight. Not too often does that type of athleticism come along. This gave him a +6 in the model for a prospect grade because of his weight adjusted speed score being over 120, which eventually came out to a final grade of 62.5. This is good for second in the class. Unfortunately, this is very much carried by his final grade was very much carried by the projected draft capital that he's expected to receive. Ranked in basically the top 70 on both mock draft database and on the PFF big board, he almost certainly locked himself, or pretty much seems to have locked himself to day 2 draft capital. Whether that is round 2 or round 3, we just kind of don't know yet. Either way, that is something to be intrigued about, and will be interesting to see where his landing spot is. Now we move over to some of the hiccups and red flags that his profile kind of highlights, because seeing his final grade and what he did at the combine might fool some people into thinking that he is probably a better prospect than most of his metrics might say. For starters, like most of the prospects outside Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price, the film grades for the rest of the class is quite daunting, and kind of so is his. Along with this, you can see that he is has a very, very underwhelming production score and reception score, ranking 7th and 9th in both of those metrics. He is also on the older side and will be a 23-year-old rookie, 24, I believe, at the start of his second year. So not ideal, just much, much older than we would like. His closest comps to the model are Amir Abdullah, CJ Procise, Cam Akers. Just not a ton of names we love. Cam Akers had a bright spot at one point, but his career was completely derailed due to injuries. So, maybe you can dream on that being something, in his range of outcomes, because he's more Cam Akers is more of a what if at that point, and has been after his Achilles injury, I believe, after his rookie or second year in the league. Realistically, though, I don't think there is a ton about Washington's profile that gets you really, really excited outside of the athleticism and projected draft capital. I know at the end of the day, we just want to see the draft capital and we kind of can project from there. But he's going to have to be an outlier, straight up. I'm not saying that I am out of him as a prospect necessarily, but his landing spot is going to heavily dictate whether or not I will be taking him in rookie drafts. To throw out some scenarios, if Mike Washington goes to a team that, gives him a clear runway to be the starter, I will be probably trying to trade away that pick or him for a more stable asset, whether that is trading back for more picks, trading for future picks, or trading for a more proven player. I just like that, possibility a lot better. I just like getting off of that risk in general. Landing spots that jump out to me as a good example of this are like the Titans, the Panthers, the Vikings, Commanders. I could see a runway or possibility for him to get a starting job or win a starting job in all these spots. On the other hand, though, if he goes to a landing spot where he's going to have competition or will find himself in a committee, I might pass on that regardless in pretty much all my rookie drafts and let my league mate select him. The Steelers, the Bengals, Seahawks would kind of all give me pause if he were to land there. They all have running backs. I know I mentioned Dax Sharpen is going to be injured, but when he comes back, I think he's probably the clear better running back than Mike Washington. They just all have guys who I think are just straight up better. That being Chase Brown, Jalen Warren, I believe Rico Dowdle is there now too in Pittsburgh. And I'll have skill sets that are just far more valuable for fantasy. And I'm just not as much of a believer in Mike Washington as maybe some other people might be, because of the lack of receiving, lack of production, a little bit of an older prospect, and just how much his athleticism and draft capital was vaulting him up in general. I hate to focus on all the negatives that come with this prospect, and I'm not hating on Mike Washington at all. I think he's a good player. I don't think he's a bad player whatsoever. He's just not my flavor, and there are too many red flags in this profile that make me want to steer clear of him. The athleticism is awesome. It's eye popping. It's awesome. We don't see a lot of guys at his size test that well, and we probably won't for a very, very long time. I'm trying to give you guys the best advice I can, and drafting Mike Washington isn't exactly something I believe is going to be very wise at the end of the day. You are hoping he is the ultimate outlier based on his profile, and where he is going to land in the NFL draft. Let's talk about another prospect that I am higher on than most, Emmett Johnson, running back out of Nebraska, checking in here as my number 5 running back. Huge breakout in his senior season. He ran for 1,450 yards on the ground, had 15 total touchdowns. To go along with it, he had 46 catches, 370 receiving yards. He was really, really good. And there are a ton of good things to talk about in his profile because if you couldn't tell, he grades out pretty well in the model, just kind of around the same group of guys in this tier. He came in with the third best prospect grade at 59.4. His closest statistical comps are Duke Johnson, Devontae Booker, and Kenneth Gainwell. Two guys here really stick out to me, that being Gainwell and Duke Johnson. They are a very similar archetype to Emmett Johnson, smaller running backs who are just above 200 pounds or a little below 200 pounds, and are of that scat back or receiving first type of archetype. Specializing isn't in one area isn't exactly ideal, but if you were to have just one skill set or a lone skill set, I would rather bet on the guy that is a good receiver out of the backfield more than anything. I understand the hesitancy though. A lot of these guys early, they're not going to be like super big contributors on early downs, or at least Gainwell and Duke Johnson weren't. But yeah, they're not the sexiest names in the world. However, we have seen some good seasons in the past from Duke Johnson as a high volume receiver. And just last season, we saw Kenneth Gainwell catch over 70 passes and be an RB2 in a committee in a backfield with Jalen Warren on a Pittsburgh Steelers team that was not a good offense. The NFL, it's evolving every single year, and we are seeing the days of every down workhorses slowly fade away. They are few and far between, and committees have become much, much more common. This is what makes me want to be a bit higher on prospects in the mold of Emmett Johnson. Limited in some fashion, but have one skill set that we covet in fantasy football the most. So if that doesn't get you at least a little excited, let me throw out some more numbers that could get you interested in, especially if he were to hit some of his higher range of outcomes, like a Duke Johnson, like a last year's Kenneth Gainwell. Despite having a pretty weak film grade by Lance Zierlein, I believe it was just a 6.10, he has the best reception score in the class by a wide margin. It's not even close. It translated to a 19% reception share, which is pretty ridiculous. Like I said, he caught 46 passes or close to 50 passes last season. Super, super underrated. He also had the third best production score at 47.9, only trailing Jeremiah Love and Nick Singleton. I know not great, but it's really, really good all around in my opinion, and solid for a prospect that a lot of guys aren't as high on. I think guys should be higher on him. His production right now is around pick 100 on mock draft database, and a little lower on the PFF big board at 137. I know the guys at PFF don't love him as much, but mock draft database has him around pick 100, which is what you love to see. Obviously, that is maybe one of the bigger holdups with Emmett Johnson. I don't think he's probably expected to get day draft capital, and he probably likely lands in the 4th round range where we saw guys, like I mentioned, like Cam Scatterbo, Bajal Tootin, and Woody Marks go from last year's draft. Another stand on his profile is the athleticism. Not a particular big gripe of mine in general, but it's worth mentioning some of his testing scores that had a lot of people worried. And I know that it didn't show up on his tape a lot, or it did show up on his tape a lot, that he wasn't just an amazing athlete. He wasn't crazy, crazy fast. But at 202 pounds, he ran a 4.56, which gave him a 93.4 speed score. He jumped 35.5 inches in the vertical and had a pretty bad 10 flat broad jump. He also did the 3-cone. He recorded a 7.32 second time, and the shuttle, which he recorded a 4.29. All these testing numbers are of the lower percentiles based on his height and weight. So not great in terms of showing what kind of athlete he is to NFL scouts at the combine. This definitely hurt his stock afterwards, but honestly though, at least I heard JJ Zachariason point this out, at least he participated, unlike a lot of the running backs that were invited to the combine. We only had 10 guys compete. I commend him for that. Even with all this though, I'm going to be taking a lot of shots on Emmett Johnson. I know I just threw out a bunch of, lack of athleticism, stuff like that. He's maybe not going to be a super like every down back. He may be, specialized as a receiving back. But if he falls to like the late second and the early third, I'm going to be taking my shots. I realize that is kind of bearish to say about a guy I have ranked inside my top 5. He may not have the highest ceiling, but I think wherever he gets drafted, he's probably going to have a role no matter what. And, he's a committee backfield injury away from taking over that backfield completely and being really, really good for a good stretch. I just don't think he's going to get the draft capital to validate or completely validate the way that I feel about him. And he's not going to go in like the first round of rookie draft. And honestly, that's completely fine. And I'm not going to be taking him in the mid to early second round just because there are a lot of wide receiver and tight end prospects that I may want to take shots on over him. That's no diss to him though. I do like him more than consensus. I think it's very, very clear at this point. Kind of sum things up with Emmett Johnson. I think he, honestly, at the end of the day, is an overall average prospect and would likely be ranked farther back in much, much better rookie classes. He has more holes to poke in his profile than you would like. He's not a great athlete, but he does have a great calling card as a receiver. We love that. That's the one thing we love, and he has it. He will almost certainly be viable in fantasy at some point in his career, maybe small stretches at the very worst. His skill set will always keep him, around in an NFL offense. And if he found himself in a committee on a good offense, he has the ability to put up numbers at the highest point, like a Kenneth Gainwell did last year in Pittsburgh, or what Duke Johnson did for most of his career in Cleveland. I feel like people don't understand how good Duke Johnson was and or how good in fantasy he was just based off of how he was as a receiver. We kind of seem like the same thing with James White when he was with the Patriots with Tom Brady. He just needs to land in the right landing spot in the right type of role and be in the perfect situation. I know that's not something we love to dream on exactly, but he's going to have a role in the NFL. I just think at the end of the day, clicking him in the late second to early third round in rookie drafts, just based on where he might be taken in the actual NFL draft, is completely fine in my opinion, and where you should be taking your shots on Emmett Johnson. Now for my last player in tier 3. Really, really sad to see him here this low, but Nicholas Singleton, one of the 2 running backs you declared from Penn State. The reason this makes me so sad is because we had such high hope for Singleton just 1 year ago, and it really surprised me that he didn't come out in the 2025 NFL draft. He had such a great junior season. Penn State made a good run to the college football playoff semifinal, and then he decided, along with Drew Allar, to run it back and make another run at the national championship. It's silly for me to sit here and say he should have come out. He cost himself a lot of money, blah, 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 yada, yada, yada. In hindsight, yes, it probably would have been smarter now looking back for him to come out. However, it is fair to say that the 2025 class at running back was loaded, and maybe he thought he could come out this year and compete for RB1 in the class with Jeremiah Love. His senior season, though, just did not go as planned. After a couple of close losses early on in the year and the loss of Drew Allar to a season-ending injury, Penn State just fell off big time, and unfortunately, so did his performance on the field. He managed only to rack up 550 rushing yards on 4.4 yards per carry. This is super underwhelming considering the year that he had prior, where he averaged 6.4 yards per carry, 1,100 yards. Even his receiving numbers, which it's considered his superpower, basically fell off quite a bit. This past year, he barely had over 200 receiving yards on 24 catches, compared to the year before where he had 41 catches, almost 400 yards. A complete drastic fall off, just a complete disaster for anybody who played for Penn State other than Katron Allen, a guy we'll talk about, a little bit later. He just did really not play well, and while people might make the excuse for him that the entire Penn State team was bad, you can't argue with the guy in this backfield who did a lot better than him, who outperformed him. I know I just mentioned it, Katron Allen. He just lapped him in every single metric or stat that you look at. I'm not trying to pile on or anything, but even with this fall off in production, you can't even look at his underlying metrics, advanced metrics, and find any sort of positive. He had just a 2.69 yards after contact per attempt and only forced 19 missed tackles on 124 carries. This comes out to a 15% missed tackles forced per attempt. Both of these metrics are some of the worst in the entire class. Not good for someone who we thought really highly of coming into this year. This is just really all unfortunate, especially for a guy of his caliber, of his prospect caliber, or coming to Penn State in his first couple of years at Penn State. How athletic he is. We'll talk about a little bit later. Now we are looking at Singleton just barely hanging on to the last spot in tier 3 and barely hanging on to like a high day 3 draft capital in the NFL draft class in a weak running back class. When I was making these rankings, I wanted to put Singleton higher. I know I haven't mentioned a lot of the numbers on the screen, but the model actually likes him way more than I do. He finished with the best production score out of everyone in the class in front of Jeremiah Love. He broke out right away as a true freshman, running for over 1,000 yards and had 13 total touchdowns. He was a former 5-star running back. It was thought to be like the next Saquon Barkley. They kind of look similar. They have similar builds, similar athleticism. His reception score is quite good too at 73.2 and ranks 3rd in the class. Singleton registered a final prospect grade of 58.3, which looking back from afar looks pretty darn good, especially if you were to take into account that his draft capital is heavily weighing him down at this point. He is valued around pick 130 to 145 on both Mock Draft Database and the PFF Big Board. To add on even more, the guy is a freak athlete. He didn't get to test at the combine. I know he suffered a broken foot at the Senior Bowl, so he wasn't able to get healthy in time for the combine. But just being conservative with things on his speed score and his 40 time. His speed score came out to a 117. The guy is 6 foot 219. We just talked about Mike Washington and how insane his combine was, and I can guarantee you that if Singleton was healthy, he would have put up similar testing numbers. I can almost guarantee it. Another positive is that even though he went back for a senior season, he is just barely 22 years old. Really, really young prospect for being a senior. This would should be a profile that I'm ready to go all in on. Just click no matter what in the second round of my rookie drafts. There are just so many holes to poke in his profile that makes me really, really hesitant. And a lot of things that people are missing. I already laid out all the advanced metrics. He doesn't break tackles. He doesn't make people miss. His breakaway run rate is not good, and it just he got kind of worse every single year, other than his freshman season. Like the numbers have just kind of stagnated. He has been honestly just gotten worse. Yeah, from his freshman season. Another red flag is that his Lance Zierlein score, the score that Lance Zierlein gave him was awful. He gave him a 6.00, and that is bad for someone that we think is way better than he is. And it's pretty much been a common theme from anyone who I've watched who is big on evaluating running back prospect film. And yeah, and this makes sense by some of his prospect model comps. Mike Davis, Kalen Balazs, Jaden Blue. Yeah, I mean, there's nobody there. I mean, Mike Davis had like 1 year where we were drafting him high in redraft, and then after that, he was dust through like halfway through that season. And I really, really wanted to be wrong about Singleton. Maybe I'm missing something. Maybe someone can tell me in the comments if I'm missing something. If you ignore some of the things in his profile, it looks pretty darn good. But you start to dig a little bit deeper and you realize that he just may be an athlete playing the running back position, unfortunately. And I sure hope I'm wrong. And I'm probably going to be taking stabs on him either at the back end of round 2 or anywhere in round 3, just for maybe the slight upside that he all of a sudden decides he wants to go back to the player he was as a freshman. Very doubtful, but I'm just afraid that if he goes in the early fourth and lands on a team that has a runway for him, that the hype is just going to get ridiculously out of control. At this point, I will just let my league mates take him and bet on the other running back in that, particular ambiguous backfield, whoever he's lining up against to get that starting job. I'm no expert, and I want to make that very clear because I can very well be wrong, but there are just too many things that tell me he just isn't that good. Man, I feel like the last couple of prospects I've just been especially negative and way more than I usually like to be. Finally, though, we get to someone and a prospect that I think has a chance to be this year's sleeper. I'm referring to the guy on the screen, Damon Claiborne, running back at Wake Forest. He came in with a 44.9 prospect grade, kind of modest, but that's good for seventh in this class and is my number 7 running back. And the first guy in tier 4, his closest statistical comps are Carlos Williams, David Cobb, and then Chase Brown. I know you probably know where I'm going with this. I am not saying he's going to be Chase Brown, but some things are very reminiscent and tells me that he can find his way to carve out a similar role that Chase Brown has in the NFL with the Bengals thus far. Comparing the two, Chase Brown had a 28.9 production score when he was a prospect. Claiborne's was 26.9, very similar. Brown's reception score was 51.1. Claiborne's was a little better at 64.3, but oddly similar. Lance Zierlein gave Brown a 6.12 film grade and Claiborne a 6.10. Their speed scores were very similar too. Brown's was a 108.5 and Claiborne was just just over 103. Brown ran a 4.43 40-yard dash, very, very athletic. Claiborne ran a 4.37, very, very athletic, very, very fast. The only real differences between the two is that Chase Brown was a little older coming out and had about like 10 to 15 pounds on him. Another likely similarity is the area that Chase Brown was taken into the 5th round is probably kind of where Claiborne ends up being selected either in the late 4th or early 5th round, I would imagine. Currently, he is around like the 140 to 170 range in projected draft capital. Just a profile I am more than inclined to chase, especially since he would likely be taken in the 3rd round of rookie drafts, maybe in the 4th round. I'm going to be clicking the button on him everywhere I can. He is explosive, has home run hitting ability, is a good pass catcher. This past year at Wake Forest doesn't signal as much that he's a good pass catcher. He was slightly inefficient with his targets, but managed to catch close to 30 passes. However, the year before, he caught 22 passes and salvaged 250 yards. He had a 1.54 yards per route run that season, and I think that is probably more indicative of the player that he is. You can also make the argument that Wake Forest just kind of sucks, pretty similar to Chase Brown when he was at Illinois. They are one of the weaker or some of the weaker ACC teams, and defenses were incredibly focused on taking away the one good thing, that being Damon Claiborne. It gives me more optimism that if he finds himself in a good situation, he can be productive with the opportunity, take full advantage, or possibly even be the starter for a year or two, maybe even get an extension after his rookie contract, kind of like Chase Brown has. I know that's on the higher range of outcomes. We have seen some other similar examples as well. The Steelers just extended Jalen Warren last year in Pittsburgh and let the guy who they took in round one walk in free agency, Najee Harris. Isaiah Pacheco was a super athlete, found himself starting for the Chiefs after a couple years, and gave us a high-end RB2 season where he averaged over 15 points per game. That guy was a seventh-round pick, really athletic, really fast, a kind of a sleeper. I realize that we are wish casting here, and being the RB7 in a class like this isn't necessarily something to be like over the moon for, but sometimes there are profiles that get overlooked, and this is where you can really hit big. Just kind of knowing these things, knowing the in-depth profile on these type of guys. Claiborne could be this year's Chase Brown, Bucky, Pacheco, the late round running back that got an opportunity early and had the profile to produce solid fantasy numbers. He could very well be the next Carlos Williams or David Cobb. But at the price of a third round pick, I am taking the swing for the possibility that he hits all day long. A prospect that I don't see a lot of people talking about is Seth McGowan, the running back out of Kentucky. Part of me kind of understands why, though. He is by far one of the older prospects in the class and will be 24 and a half years old on draft night. He was in college also for 6 years, was never truly exceptional. His numbers don't pop off the screen for the last season either. He rushed for over 700 yards, 4.4 yards per carry. He had like 12 touchdowns, which is good, but wasn't the biggest receiving threat either in his final season. McGowan had just 126 receiving yards on 19 catches. Lance Zierlein didn't grade him too well either. He falls below the 6.0 mark, which isn't the greatest to see. I don't want to say too much about the situation because I don't know him as a person, but I think it's fair to point out that he had a legal situation after his freshman season at Oklahoma in 2020. This led to him playing the next couple of years at community college. I believe he had like a gap year after 2020 before transferring to New Mexico State in 2024 and then transferring once again to Kentucky in 2025. It's been a journey for McGowan. Usually, any big legal situation would be a massive red flag. But from everything I've read, he seems to have really turned it around. A lot of people seem to be high on him as a person now. He seems to have made a lot of big strides, and that's just really good to see that, despite the incident, it's good to see a redemption story and someone take full advantage of a second chance. His projected draft capital kind of gives me hope, too, that he will stay in that fourth, fifth round range. These just all really big positives on his front. Pointing out some of the strengths in his profile actually came a lot easier than I initially thought. He has the second best reception score at 80.6. This comes from his stint at New Mexico State, where he had a 16.3 reception share. I understand the quality of competition isn't strong at New Mexico State, not a big school. They're not playing very good teams. But another piece of good context is that he also had another running back from this class as his teammate in the backfield, some guy named Mike Washington Jr. It's interesting to note that he was way more productive as a rusher and receiver despite getting around the same amount of touches. His production score doesn't blow you away at 47.0, and his prospect grade of 43.5 is 8th among the class. But it's fair to point out that some of his models of the comp kind of give you some hope to his profile. Maybe he can hit in these range of outcomes. You never know. He also got a Ramondre Stevenson comp along with Devin Neal, who had some nice couple of games when he was a starter with New Orleans last year, and Javorius or Buck Allen. Now, it's not the most likely outcome that he can become a Ramondre Stevenson type of player in fantasy, but I have seen crazier things happen, and there are definitely some big positives if you look under the hood. Some of his metrics are really suppressed because of the legal incident and dip his overall prospect grade because of it. It's hard to get on board with some of the higher ranked guys in this class, and the range we're going to have to select them in rookie drafts based on the strengths in their profiles. McGowan, though, I think he will go undrafted or like in the fourth round of rookie drafts. Most people are going to have no clue who he is, and you can take a stab on him with one of your last picks in the draft. It's a dart throw at the end of the day anyways, so why not take a shot on someone who could make some waves, possibly be a Ramondre Stevenson type of guy, produce in his rookie season if given the opportunity. I think it's worth a shot, and I think that you guys should be a lot higher than Seth McGowan, especially third, fourth round of your rookie drafts. Just be on the lookout for him. Kind of see where he eventually gets selected in the NFL draft. Another prospect I was hoping to be a lot higher on, Katron Allen, the other running back out of Penn State. Actually, the far more productive one when you look at the counting numbers from 2025. He lapped Nicholas Singleton almost everywhere you look. He ran for 1,300 yards, 6.2 yards per carry. That's what we're talking about. Scored 15 total touchdowns. Unlike Singleton, he had way better advanced metrics, the second highest PFF grade behind Jeremiah Love, 3.77 yards after contact per attempt, 27.1 missed tackles force per attempt on over 200 carries, a good sample size, a really solid 8.1% breakaway run rate. So he's breaking some big runs, despite he's a really big running back. He was just really good in 2025, and this all backs it up. He is also, like I mentioned, another large running back. He measured in at 5'11", 216, so a big boy. He didn't do any testing at the combine or his pro day, which is really frustrating because it would have given us a good look at how good of an athlete he might be. This makes me think that he probably isn't a good one, and it would have probably hurt his draft stock. So I think it's probably safe to say that he isn't a high end athlete overall. His draft capital and draft projection is anywhere from the 150s to the 160s. I think he could maybe go a little bit earlier. So at this point, we're kind of maybe looking at like a fifth round, maybe late fourth round type of projection type of guy. I think a lot of this is attributed to his lack of athleticism, but also might be because of the hiccups or some of the red flags in his profile. Like, for instance, one of the glaring ones is his lack of production as a receiver. He had just a 26.4 production score and a 41.4 reception score. This ranked 11th and 14th in the class. He never caught over 20 passes any year except for his true freshman season at Penn State, and consistently hovered around like the 14 to 18 area with a pretty low yards per reception. His 0.74 yards per route run for his career is another indication of that skill set kind of lacking. And sure, I understand the people who want to make the argument for that role being catered to his teammate Nicholas Singleton, but you would expect to see at least a couple of more flashes through through at least one of his 4 years. His Zerline grade was also very weak at just a 6.00. Even though I think he is a good football player, his skill set might translate or might not translate all that well to fantasy. His closest statistical comps in the model really back this up as well. Jamal Williams, Audric Estime, Wayne Gallman, all early down grinders, bigger body backs that lacked the receiving skill set to consistently succeed as a fantasy asset. At the end of the day, this is a fantasy football channel, and if you aren't going to catch passes or be an elite, efficient, high-end talent as a rusher and be selected high in the NFL draft, kind of like similar to a Jarian Price, there isn't going to be much hope for you that you're going to figure it out at the next level. I do happen to have optimism that Allen can be a very nice complementary back and could have some value if he lands on a really good team in a committee, kind of like what Jamal Williams did when he was in Green Bay, and eventually what he did when he had his really great season in Detroit. That is just not something I am willing to bet on, though. Not something I want to be taking very high. In the off chance that he found himself in a good situation, I think it's perfectly fine to take some stabs on him late third round or fourth round of your rookie drafts. There's just not a ton to get excited about in Allen's profile because of its weaknesses in the biggest spots that are really essential to fantasy football. However you feel about him, just be aware of the red flags and don't be reaching on him in your rookie drafts. I know there's a lot of Penn State fans out there, but just don't be doing it. This is not a profile that we want to be chasing very often. To end this thing off, we have Adam Randall, the running back out of Clemson, my last running back on the top 10 list and the last guy to make it into tier 4. Really interesting profile, and if you don't know much about Randall, he is a wide receiver who converted to a running back where he played his first 3 seasons at Clemson. Not only is he of the archetype that we have seen more and more over the past couple of seasons with Tyron Tracy, Antonio Gibson, Brashard Smith from last year's class, he is a massive running back. I know we talked about a ton of guys in this class that are just huge running backs, but he takes it to another level. You thought Katron Allen, Singleton, Mike Washington, Jonah Coleman was big. Randall is 6'3", 232. Now, I could be misremembering, but I can't think of another dude that weighed that much and was that tall since like maybe Derrick Henry. Not only has Randall got size, he also tested out really well at the combine. He ran a 4.50 flat 40, jumped 37 inches in the vertical, recorded a 10.4 broad, and bench pressed 26 reps. Some of his numbers, like the 10-yard split and shuttle, were kind of like mediocre, but at that size and weight, it's pretty hard to move laterally really quick at the same time. His speed score netted him a +2 for his grade, which came out to a final of 38.0. This measures up close to Brashard Smith, another converted wide receiver from last year, Ollie Gordon, another really big back, and Quadri Allison. Nothing flashy, but not bad for someone who played 1 year at running back and came in as a wide receiver. Speaking of receiving, that just happens to be where he excels the most and exactly what we love to see in his profile. In 2025, he had 49 targets and caught 36 of them for 250 yards and 3 touchdowns. He had a 0.91 yards per route run, but you can chalk that up to, playing a whole new position. I really like to see it over one, but once again, playing a new position. The same excuse can be made for his advanced metrics being, relatively weak. Very, very average 3.13 yards after contact per attempt, and not very good. 19% missed tackles, fourth per attempt. Not awful, I guess, but just very, very average or a little bit below average at best. This is another type of profile that I love taking shots on in rookie drafts, like in the end of the third, fourth round. It's had a pretty nice hit rate as of recently. Antonio Gibson was a hot name for a while. I believe he was like a top 5, top 10 running back in Dynasty at one point. Tyron Tracy was really, really, really productive in his rookie season, especially last year when Cam Scatterby went down. Brashard Smith, not so much, especially with Kenneth Walker there. It's going to be even harder now for him to kind of get a role. Despite not being exceptional at anything, Randall does have the pass catching chops to be someone who could have a role if he lands in the right place and an opportunity arises, kind of like Tyron Tracy did in his first year with the New York Giants. More in the mold, like I said, of Tracy and Gibson. Randall is a larger back, so if given the opportunity, he can hold down that goal line role and won't be taken off the field in those situations. I like this skill set a lot, and considering he will be going in the fourth round, likely, of rookie drafts, I'm kind of probably going to be scooping him wherever I can, assuming he doesn't go undrafted in the NFL draft. Honestly, though, who cares if you miss on someone like this in your rookie drafts? They are pure dart throws, and I've said that a couple of times with the last couple of guys. And you should just always be looking for upside. Randall has that and the skill set to do what Gibson and Tracy did in their rookie seasons, kind of capitalize on that value and cash out if you want to. Maybe he becomes like an ultimate outlier and he becomes a starting running back in the NFL. I doubt it. But, he's going to give you, maybe if he hits, he's going to give you the opportunity to sell him off at a higher value than you drafted him. Just have Adam Randall's name in the back of your head. He will be someone that is a sleeper. One of your league mates or a lot of your league mates will not have heard of him before, not going to really know who he is. He's worth a shot, and I highly recommend that you take it. So that is going to do it for this video. I am super pumped for the NFL draft. I'm super pumped to see where all these guys go. The draft is currently, I believe, 3 weeks away from this Thursday, and it cannot get here soon enough. As we all know, we can have a ranking for this running back class, but rarely is someone 100% correct on what the order they will be selected. I'm most certainly in for a bunch of surprises, and even though this isn't the best or deepest running back class, it has some really, really sneaky names, has some profiles that maybe, of course, we already know Jeremiah Love, he's going to be a future star, or maybe even a couple guys that can become future starters and make an impact early on for your dynasty teams. I really hope to help you guys out and give you guys a deeper look, a deeper dive into the top 10 of this class, or in my opinion, the top 10 running backs in this class based on my model. It's important to look at all the factors, possibilities, and variables, and I feel like my model plus the evaluation did that fairly well. Let me know below how you feel about this class, and if you have a favorite sleeper running back. Did I miss somebody? Just please challenge me in the comments. I want to know if you guys are higher, lower on some of the prospects that I had ranked here, or like I mentioned, did I not rank someone that you deserve, believes to be in the top 10? I want to hear it all. Blast me below. Tell me what you thought about the top 10. I would love to converse with you guys any way that I can. Either way, I'm super excited for the coming weeks as the NFL draft gets even closer. And as always, everyone take care, and I will see you guys next time.